All right, good morning, class. I'm just gonna give a recording of this really quick so that we can make sure that we have this viable information. So this week we're jumping into our next unit of mitosis and genetics and all things that apply to that. So I'm going to pull up classwork really quick here so we can see what we need to focus on there. So really we are in the home stretch. We just finished unit 2. We're now on to unit 3. This is our last unit here in biology. There's only 3 weeks of it. We have our test and then we have our final exam. So really not that much more to do. This week we're studying mitosis and the cell cycle. You have a quiz to turn in, a discussion, and then your mitosis choice board. So let me open up this mitosis choice board for a moment. In the mitosis choice board, you're going to open this document here, and you need to demonstrate your understanding of mitosis in one of 3 ways. You need to create a drawing for me. You need to find some Oreos and some sprinkles and make an Oreo mitosis board, or you need to create a Google slide for me and turn it in along with this assignment. Either of those 3 is a great option, to demonstrate that you're understanding of this assignment. Sorry, I didn't share my tab. Like I said, a drawing, an Oreo mitosis, or a Google slide. Either of those 3 is a great option for this assignment, just to show that you know how mitosis works, which we're going to go over today. All right. So now let me jump into mitosis, cell cycle, everything that we've got going on there. All right, so the biggest thing, sorry. The biggest thing we want to remember about mitosis and the cell cycle is that it's cell division. So we need to remember that all cells are coming from pre-existing cells and all organisms start as one cell. So let's think about ourselves for a minute. We are made of millions and millions and trillions and billions of cells. And the answer is, how do we get to the size that we are? Because honestly, we're quite large if you consider how teeny tiny an egg and a sperm are that start our life. And that is solely from cell division. So we're made up of millions of cells. It's not just one cell that grows into be our arm. Okay, our arm, again, is made up of millions and millions of cells. After cells grow to their maximum size, that's when they end up dividing into 2 different cells, and that continues for the entire life of an organism. Prokaryotic cell division is a little different than eukaryotic cell division. Remember, we are eukaryotes, but prokaryotes are much simpler. They're single-celled organisms, so they typically divide by a process called binary fission. So what happens first is they replicate their DNA. Then they're going to separate their chromosomes. So the chromosomes become separate, and then they move to each end of the cell. You can see that right here, where it's kind of moving right here. And then in step 3, the cell starts to separate, and it ends up forming 2 daughter cells down here. Okay, so it's a really simple process. It adds a little bit more cytoplasm. The cytoplasm also splits, but then you've got these 2 daughter cells with completely identical genetic information in each one. With the cell cycle, you have to remember that organisms grow in size, but you are not growing because your cells are getting larger. You're growing because your cells divide. That's really important. That's the biggest thing we need to remember about the cell cycle and cell division. Mitosis is the process in which your cells are dividing, which is our biggest and main focus for study today. And we want to control this process because we need to keep it under control, because if cells continue to grow rapidly, that is the presence of cancer. So if you're thinking about lung cancer, for instance, what ends up happening is when people smoke, their lungs get coated with the nicotine and with the tar inside of their lungs. And then their villi or their villi end up dying off, and then their cells start to go into overdrive to replace those villi. Well, once they go into overdrive, that's when lung cancer starts, because the cells go, oh, I need to keep creating, I need to keep creating, I need to keep creating, and they don't realize when there's a healthy amount of cells and when there's not a healthy amount of cells. And that's truly because the cells are so sick that they don't understand that they're no longer healthy. Right? So the cell cycle helps to keep and make sure that everything's in check. So our cell cycle, mitosis is 10%, but it's the 10% we're going to focus on today of the cell cycle. And then interphase is the other 90% of the cell cycle. We'll talk about interphase as well, but really we're going to focus on mitosis today, or what we like to call the M phase, when the cells are actually splitting, when they're dividing. Interphase is going to cover that when they're growing, when they're replicating that DNA, and when the cell's actually being a functioning cell and doing what it's supposed to do. Most of the time, cells are not dividing. So let's talk about the cell cycle. There's checkpoints along the cell cycle to make sure that everything's in order. 1, to make sure that cells are growing properly. 2, to make sure that they replicate their DNA properly. And 3, to make sure the cell is carrying out their function or doing what it's assigned to do. We know that cells are very specific to what they're assigned to do, and so we know that each cell has a specific function. Cell cycles, part of that job is to make sure that the cell is carrying out its function, so that a lung cell is doing what a lung cell is supposed to do, and a stomach cell is doing what a stomach cell is supposed to do. Then, once they're doing all of those things, they're free to divide. They said, you know how to grow, you have the material you need, and you know how to do your job. Now you can divide and create a new cell that can be just like you. So our parts of interphase here are going to be G1, S, and G2. So in G1, that's where the cells are growing individually. So they start itty bitty and then they get a little bit bigger. In S, that's when they're making or synthesizing DNA. And then in G2, that's when the cell growth ends up preparing for mitosis. And so that's also where, that checkpoint comes in, making sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do. G1, S, and G2 are all, again, stages of interphase. So checkpoints along the way. So here in G1, on this little line right here, with that checkpoint, that's where we're checking to see if they're growing well, if they're damaged, do they have the right resources. Checkpoint 2, we're making sure that the DNA replicated properly. Again, is that cell growing well? And 3, we're making sure that all the chromosomes are lined up during that stage of metaphase there. All right. And now we are into another. So what happens, say you get to one of those 3 checkpoints and the cell's like, no, I'm totally broken, I can't be fixed. So what happens there is you're in apoptosis, or in other words, cell death. And that makes sure that cells that are damaged are not dividing and creating more damaged cells throughout your body. Proteins help to regulate this cycle. So you get to any one of those 3 checkpoints throughout the cell, and it's like, oh, I can't replicate DNA. Then it goes to cell death. It goes to apoptosis. Oh, I'm not doing my job that I'm supposed to be doing. Again, goes to cell death, and make sure that it's not creating new cells that also can't do their job properly. So then the cell cycle gets divided again, a little bit smaller. There's a point in here, it's called G0, and that's where cells are just resting. At this point, cells are not preparing to divide. Many cells or neurons, they spend their whole life in this phase, and then some cells never at all even enter the phase of mitosis. Here's a cute little picture of a cell in the process of going through interphase of the cell cycle and then into mitosis there. See, it divides. It's kind of cute. So it grows, and then look, it's making DNA. And then, oh, I'm ready. And then, oh, there it goes. It splits. All right, and then there are a couple of videos in this presentation, but I will allow you guys to watch those videos on your own. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch them through this one. You have access, like always, you have access to this PowerPoint. So in the cell cycle, though, the big thing we wanted to focus on today was mitosis. So when mitosis happens, it's dividing cells and making an identical copy of that cell. So i.e. kind of like a twin of that cell, right? It also makes sure to repair any damage that's caused. It creates body growth. And it does not make sperm or egg cells. That happens in meiosis, which we will learn next week. Remember that cells are not always dividing. It's a very short, like we said, 10% of the time is when cells are dividing. The other 90% of the time, they're spent in interphase. So let's talk about mitosis. So in the nucleus, we have our DNA, and we have new cells have the same DNA as old cells. So basically, like the DNA that you're born with is the DNA that all of your cells have. Obviously, they have different jobs, but it's the, the same DNA. So the DNA that your mom gave you and that your dad gave you, it's the same DNA throughout your body. DNA is organized into chromosomes. That's made up of some DNA and a little bit of protein. Humans have 46 chromosomes in every human body of nuclei. Right? So we have 46 chromosomes, 46 chromatids, and then when they divide, you get 92 chromatids, but still 46 chromosomes, and that's when they split in two. So in interphase, that's when all the DNA is replicated. When you duplicate the cell material before splitting, and you're replicating the chromosomes, you end up with double the amount of chromatids, but still the same amount of chromosomes. So a great way to remember mitosis is called PMAT. So we start in prophase, then we go to metaphase, anaphase, and then end with telophase. And we'll go through what each of those steps mean. So first, the stage one is in proteins. This is when the chromosomes are condensing and then also thickening. And this is where the nucleus is still visible. So right here, the chromosomes here they're getting a little smaller, condensing, still very visible, and they're getting a little bit thicker to make them easier to divide. At the ends of the cells, you have these centrioles, and they help in the formation of the spindle fibers that are going to help in the splitting process, in the actual division process of mitosis. Okay, so the next step is going to be metaphase, and this is where all the chromosomes are going to. So we created all these chromosomes, and now they're going to line up down the middle of the cell. Okay, so you see they kind of line up with all of their centers, their centromeres, right here down the middle of the cell. And then these spindle fibers that we talked about the last time are going to come in and connect to those spindle fibers. Here, the nucleus is no longer visible, and that's because we need to prepare for the division of the cell. Next, we have anaphase. So in anaphase, those spindle fibers actually come in and they attach to the chromosomes on either end of it. And that's when they end up pulling those chromosomes to the edge of the cell, okay, and separating them to the edge of the cell to prepare for cell division. So once those chromosomes are split and they're at each side of the cell, that's when we can move into telophase. And that is when they're, physically at the opposite end of the cell, the new nuclei are forming around the cell. And at the end goal, we're going to have two cells because these, as you see, they pulled, then they kind of split, and then they're going to close, and then they're going to split into two cells. All right. So lastly, and that's it, the final process is cytokinesis. So that's the splitting of the cytoplasm. And that happens right after PMAT, or, the full process of mitosis. Okay. So we've got a fun little comment over here. It says, Gus, yeah. Mitosis and all fun and games until you lose a friend, okay, because they're splitting, right? And then to end here, there are two more videos. Sorry about that. There are two more videos that you guys are more than willing to watch or welcome to watch. They're both very, very informative and great stuff. Please reach out. Mitosis and cell division is a very difficult concept. If you guys are not understanding the material that you're trying to learn, please reach out and I would be glad to cover it with you. I know that it's difficult material, and I just want to make sure that you guys actually understand this material because it's a really big part of, everything biology related. All right, well, have a great day, and please let me know if you need anything. Thanks.